Good morning and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Frest. I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks to Nicholas at First Amendment Radio. We're here on the air this morning. And we're going to continue our inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. The extraordinary biblical relationship between the United States and the Holy See. Where is it found in the Bible? Revelation chapter 13. It describes the first beast that rose up out of the sea, that is the sea of people in populated Europe, and then another beast that rose up in the wilderness, an unpopulated area of the world, that being the United States of America. And the second beast that rose up in the wilderness causes the whole world to worship the first beast, that is the sea beast. And who is the sea beast? Why, the beast that ruled over the seas of people in Europe, the papacy. It is the United States of America that causes the whole world to worship the papacy. And how do we worship? By obedience, service. You see, the Pope requires the same obedience and service as God requires of his people. That's why it's important for us to know who the Christ is, and likewise who the Antichrist is, so that we don't obey and serve the wrong Christ. And that's what this book is going to reveal to us. Who is the Antichrist? Who controls the second beast that rolls up out of the wilderness? Who sets foreign and domestic policy for the second beast of Revelation chapter 13, the United States? This book is entitled The Global Vatican. It's written by former U.S. Ambassador to the so-called Holy See, Francis Rooney. And you can get this book, The Global Vatican, from Roman and Littlefield. And I highly recommend those Bible-believing Protestant Christians who count it worthy to worship and obey and serve Jesus Christ the Messiah, and also to denounce and proclaim to the world that the Pope, the papacy, is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of Scripture. You see, we have two missions: to worship Christ and to disobey and inform the world who the Antichrist is. The Bible leaves no room for doubt. History confirms it. The Spirit attests to it. And this author is revealing information that true Bible-believing Christians ought to know. Now we'll continue where we left off yesterday on page 6, if you're following along, in the first chapter of the book entitled The Greatest Evils to be Feared. According to Protestants, the overwhelmingly majority Protestant people of the colonies feared most of all papal influence in the colonies. And they were fearful of these Roman Catholics in the only Roman Catholic colony of the period, Maryland, named after the Virgin Mary. Now, I'll back up one paragraph for continuity purposes and read the last paragraph that we concluded with yesterday. The author says, rich or poor, Catholics worship quietly in homes and in small private chapels, a function both of the illicitness of the public mass and the scarcity of churches. Remember, Roman Catholicism was suppressed. No open worship of the Mass in public. And Catholics couldn't hold political office or any positions of responsibility. They were looked at with suspicion and fear. And it says most of their priests were itinerant missionaries who traveled great distances through the countryside, showing up in towns between long intervals to perform baptisms, weddings, burials, and other rites. Quote, "You must not imagine that our chapels look as yours do," one Jesuit missionary wrote home to England in 1764. "They are in great forests, some miles from any house of hospitality. Swamps, runs, miry holes, lost in the night, as yet and ever will in this country attend us," unquote. Pretty miserable hope for this particular writer, but Roman Catholicism now is the dominant. Since Vatican Council II, Roman Catholicism is the dominant religion in this country. Having received the assent of the Protestants who have repudiated their Protestantism and no longer regard the papacy as the Antichrist, as did true Bible-believing Protestants throughout history, they are now ready to ecumenically reunite with the papacy, reunite with the Roman Catholic Church, though they still maintain their Protestant names, Baptists, Lutherans, Methodists, Episcopalians, on and on and on. They are now fully in bed with the scarlet harlot of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. So, Roman Catholicism started out very, very slowly and clandestinely, and with a huge mission, and that is to overthrow this overwhelmingly Protestant land. And who better to do that than the historical Carroll family, the mercenary warriors for the Pope, those who conquered Ireland for the Pope and made Ireland Catholic. They've got an even bigger job to do in this colonial period, and that is to overthrow and cause this nation to fulfill its prophetic role as the wilderness beast that rises up and causes the whole world to worship the first beast, the papacy. Now the author continues, he says, given these obstacles, it's a good bet that the man who later became the first Roman Catholic bishop of the United States seldom met a priest as a young boy. Roman Catholicism was suppressed. Charles Carroll, Daniel Carroll, and John Carroll, the ancient warriors for the popes, were going to be the ones that Rome was going to rely upon. Now, in section 2 of this chapter, the author writes, John Carroll, and I will just remind you that he became a Jesuit priest. John Carroll was born in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, on January 8th, 1735. Okay, there's your Marlboro man. And you thought it was a cigarette, right? This is the original Marlboro man. You remember the old Marlboro commercials? If you're my age and better, you can remember the cigarette commercials that used to run on the television. Tall, blue-eyed cowboy sitting on a gallant horse, wearing a big cowboy hat, and reaching into his vest and lighting a Marlboro cigarette. Well, this is the original Marlboro man, John Carroll. And on January 8th, 1735, he was born. And the author says not much is known of Carroll's childhood. As a matter of fact, not much is known of the Carroll's valiant history of mercenary service to the Vatican. And he says He was probably educated as at home as a young boy, as were many Catholic children, since Catholic education outside the home was prohibited. Okay? Roman Catholicism was prohibited. So if he got any education, that is any Catholic education, and for those of you who don't know, when you're in a Roman Catholic family, any and all education is Roman Catholic education, because the arts and the sciences have no value unless they have Roman Catholic underpinnings, unless they have Roman Catholic aims and goals, unless they are used in service for the Pope to extend his jurisdiction, his power, and authority over the whole world. As divine right vicar of Christ, he has the right to rule this world, and the service that every Roman Catholic is commissioned is to help extend the influence of the papacy wherever there are Catholics. Okay, and Maryland is a Catholic colony. So the goal of the Roman Catholic children in that land was to receive a Roman Catholic, or even better yet, a Jesuit education, and then serve to extend the Pope's power and authority within the country. Now, at age 12, Jesuit John Carroll, not a Jesuit at this time, however, he attended a semi-covert Jesuit school at Bohemia Manor. Okay? And this is located on the upper eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. So, even though Roman Catholicism is outlawed and suppressed, this Carroll, John Carroll, frequented Bohemia Manor. Okay, it's spelled just like it sounds. You can look it up on the internet and see it for yourself. A clandestine, the author admits that it was a semi-covert Jesuit school at Bohemia Manor. It's still there today. You can see it. You can visit the place. It's located on the upper eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay. A year later, in the summer of 1748, 13-year-old Jackie, as they called him, said farewell to his family and sailed out of the Chesapeake, following a route across the Atlantic taken by many Maryland Catholic boys in the 18th century. Okay? Why are they leaving the colony, their Roman Catholic colony in Maryland, at age 13 and risking their lives crossing the Atlantic Ocean? Why, of course, to get a Jesuit education, a thorough Jesuit education. More importantly, a European Jesuit education. Take them away from their friends and family and their country, bring them back to Europe where the popes ruled supreme, and give them a proper Jesuit education. Now, what is a proper Jesuit education? Well, of course, to overthrow this Protestant land. And you can't have an education like that on Protestant land, especially when the Protestants are protesting and putting down Roman Catholicism. So Roman Catholics in service to their Pope have to get their education in Europe. In this case, Flanders, and a little town called Omar, St. Omar, or Omer it's called. St. Omer, Jesuit school, historical Jesuit school, and it was created right after the Protestant Reformation. Why? Because the Jesuits had to defeat Protestantism. They created these schools, educated Roman Catholics on how to conquer Protestantism and to extend the Pope's temporal and spiritual power wherever they live. So Jackie, John Carroll, said farewell to his family and sailed out of the Chesapeake, following a route across the Atlantic taken by many Maryland Catholic boys in the 18th century. Accompanying him was his 11-year-old cousin Charles. Now, to be more specific, this is Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the son of the first Charles Carroll. Charles Carroll of Carrollton became very, very well known and popular in the colonies because he engaged in a political debate in one of the primary newspapers at the time, and he was called in that debate anonymously First Citizen. And he gained popular attention. He became known as a wise man in the colonies at the time, many not knowing that he was Roman Catholic, and even fewer knowing that he had a European Jesuit education. Okay, accompanying him was 11-year-old cousin Charles, the future signer of the Declaration of Independence. Future signer of the Declaration of Independence. Why would a Catholic be included in a signer of the Declaration of Independence when Roman Catholicism was suppressed? Unless, of course, the Declaration of Independence from Protestant Great Britain was a Catholic mission. You see, England was stubbornly Protestant. The Catholics would battle back and try to take over the country for the Pope, but somehow the Bible just had more sway than the papal tyrant from Rome. And the Protestants diligently fought back. They knew who the Antichrist was, surely. We don't today, but they did, and they successfully battled back, and they interminably made England Protestant. Despite every effort of the popes to overthrow the Protestant crown of England, the Protestants always fought back and reserved Protestantism as the national religion, okay? But the second beast, the wilderness beast, the United States of America, was not to be Protestant. Okay? Because to fulfill its prophetic role, it has to cause the whole world to worship the first beast, the papacy. So despite the fact that the colonies were overwhelmingly Protestant, this is a mission of the Jesuits to take over the government slowly but surely, slowly at first, and with a smile on your face and a warm, welcoming hand for the Protestants, because you don't dare wake up their Protestant sentiments. You don't give them any reason to annihilate you, but to bide your time. Work diligently behind the scenes, keeping clandestine and secret your ultimate goal to overthrow the government, and then to use that government and the Protestants that live in it to fight your wars, your holy wars, your crusades, and conduct your inquisitions without their knowledge to conquer the rest of the world and subject it to the authority of the papacy. You talk about a huge mission, a dangerous mission. It was, and it still is, because if Protestantism ever wakes from its almost unrecoverable slumber, the Jesuits are in trouble, big trouble. Roman Catholicism is in big trouble. Antichrist is in trouble because Christ now actively dwells in the hearts and minds of his people. That's what happened during the Protestant Reformation. That's when that little group of people in the world calling themselves Protestants after reading the Bible for the first time realized that the papacy was the Antichrist, and they overthrew every government in Europe practically. The only governments surviving were those who were historically staunchly Roman Catholic: France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. The rest of them became democratically Protestant. They overthrew their papal monarchs. They liberated all the people. And the papacy was on the ropes. The papacy didn't have but a shadow of the power that he had before. He had but a shadow of the wealth that he had before. He lost his ability to tax the nations and then to take their hard-earned gold and turn it into crusades for the Pope. The Pope either sinks or swims upon the destiny of these colonies. You see, the papacy was nigh unto death in Europe. There was only one hope for the survival and yet recovery and yet overwhelmingly conquer the rest of the world, unless that hope came from the United States of America. The Pope's eggs were all in one basket, 13 of them, and only one of them was Roman Catholic. Huge, huge endeavor. Now, accompanying him was John Carroll, was his 11-year-old cousin Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the future signer of the Declaration of Independence. The Pope desperately needed a Declaration of Independence from staunchly Protestant England. See, the Church of England had a lot of sway in the colonies. The Church of England was regarded as a Protestant colony, despite the fact that the Puritans despised the Church of England, thought it was more Catholic than the Catholic Church. But nonetheless, it was desperately necessary for the colonies to be separated from Protestant Great Britain. They needed that Declaration of Independence. And Charles Carroll, John Carroll, and Daniel Carroll helped to bring about that Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War that permanently separated this country from Protestant Great Britain. Okay? You've never read any of that in your history books because they've all been rewritten by the Jesuits. Those who produce our history books are carefully vetted. Okay? And there's a Jesuit or Roman Catholic priest advisor on all of these committees that select textbooks for schools. You can't have a roughshod Protestant writer writing the history books, because of all of this knowledge would be known among the children of this country. So, in the name or under the pretext of religious liberty, we have to put all these controversial subjects behind us and just get on with it, okay? So the history books are just a collection of names and dates and events, but no rhyme or reason to it that is counterproductive to the ultimate mission of the Jesuits to take this once Protestant land and use it to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. You can't accomplish that goal unless you have strict control of the information that is gained in the schools of this country, and also, and especially, from the churches of this country. Protestantism, the source of Protestantism, Protestant belief was in the churches. So they had to get control of the pulpits. To get control of the pulpits, to put down any Protestant discussion and study in the churches, they had to get control of the seminaries. And that's what they did. And in the seminaries, they taught futurism, exonerating the papacy and putting the onus of Antichrist on a single man that doesn't come on the world scene until just before Christ returns. You see how shrewd a warrior these Carrolls and these Jesuits are? He says the Carroll cousins landed in London, then made their way across the Channel and north through France to Flanders. A Jesuit school there in the town of St. Omer had been educating Catholic boys since the late 16th century. What happened in the early 16th century? The Protestant Reformation, 1517. Liberty came all over Europe, and the Jesuits and the papacy together and the monarchs of Europe had to get together and stop this Protestant rebellion. And they did it through education. And one of the principal sources of education was St. Omer in France. And that's where these John Carroll, Daniel Carroll, and Charles Carroll were educated for a purpose. We'll return right after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. We're continuing our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. We're talking about the education of these Jesuit-trained Carroll boys, these mercenaries for the Pope. And these Carroll cousins landed in London, having left the Chesapeake Bay on a treacherous journey across the Atlantic, made their way across the English Channel and north through France to Flanders. And it says a Jesuit school there in the town of St. Omer had been educating Catholic boys since the late 16th century. What are they educating for? To overthrow the Protestant Reformation. Protestant Reformation took place in 1517 officially. Protestantism goes all the way back to, the ministry of Paul. Paul predicted who the Antichrist would be. He would be that which rises up in the power vacuum left by the Roman Caesars, and until the Roman Caesars were taken out of the way, the papacy could not come to power. And when the old Roman Empire was deceased, it was literally reborn in the papacy. The Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire at that point. So Paul was teaching who the Antichrist was. You see, how could Paul be teaching that the Caesars at that time occupied the very seat of the Antichrist, and the Antichrist wouldn't arise until the Caesars were put out of business? If it's true what they teach in the churches today, that the Antichrist comes late, in the very last few years before Christ's return. You see how we've been deluded in our churches? Do you see what the purpose of this St. Omer school, this Jesuit school, is? To conquer Protestantism. And that's what these Carroll boys are assigned to do, to conquer Protestantism in an overwhelmingly Protestant United States, or colonial United States, before United States even was. The Protestant Reformation began in 1517. The Jesuits were created in 1540 immediately to answer the Protestant Reformation, to destroy the Protestant Reformation. The Jesuits were created. That's their whole purpose for existence. Their first line of action was to convene the Council of Trent, where officially the Roman Catholic Church announced a war of annihilation against Protestantism, and it included 100 specific damnations for basic Protestant beliefs. In other words, give you an example. They said at the Council of Trent that if you don't believe in that the Eucharist, that little piece of bread that the priest holds up and says, Hoc est inus corpus meus, and then all of a sudden that piece of bread becomes the literal blood, body, soul, and divinity of Christ, Jesus Christ, whole and entire, and is to be offered once again on the altar of the Roman Catholic Church as a bloodless sacrifice for the remission of sins, a perpetual sacrifice of the blood of Jesus' body, a literal reenactment of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. You are accursed. That's right. And if you don't believe that it is divine law that you must confess your sins in the ear of a Roman Catholic priest and then do penance as issued by that priest and then receive absolution for your sins from that priest, then you too are accursed. And if you believe that the Bible outranks the Pope, that the Bible outranks Roman Catholic canon law, you believe that the Bible is your sole source of learning for faith and practice, you too are accursed. And if you say that the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church are against God, you too are accursed. Shall I go on, or do you get the picture? So the Council of Trent was convened for many purposes, but the principal purpose was to denounce Protestantism as an abject heresy, to be routed out of the earth, and it was up to these Jesuits to get it done, the very ones who convened the Council of Trent. I call the Council of Trent truly the bloody Jesuit Council of Trent, the bloody Jesuit Counter-Reformation Council of Trent. War was declared upon you at the Council of Trent. A war of annihilation or a war of assimilation. And that's what we see today. Vatican Council II, assimilating the Protestants back into the Roman Catholic Church, or at least under the Pope's authority, and then being forced to obey Roman Catholic canon law and not God's law, the law of liberty. You think the Jesuits have been successful based on those terms? I would say they have been infinitely successful in their mission. That started with Charles Carroll, John Carroll, and Daniel Carroll. First, we have to have a Declaration of Independence. Then we have to have a war of liberation from England. Then we have to have our own Constitution. Then we'll be rid of the Church of England and Protestantism. Maybe we can deal with these Protestants if we make it a tenet of our Constitution that religious liberty predominates. Yes, I know we Roman Catholics have never championed religious liberty. You're either Catholic or you're burning at the stake. But the situation demands that we be cautious here in this second beast, or it might rise up to bite us in the fanny. So, little by little, the Carroll cousins landed in London, then made their way across the Channel north through France to Flanders. A Jesuit school there in the town of St. Omer had been educating Catholic boys since the late 16th century. You can believe that was an anti-Protestant education. A lot of other things may have characterized that education, but it was principally an anti-Protestant education, a counter-Reformation education. The school offered an extraordinary education for an American, deeper and more cosmopolitan than any colonial Protestant was likely to receive at the time. Why? What kind of an education do you suppose the Protestants were getting? Well, they were getting a private and public Protestant education. And what was that education? Christ is the Messiah. Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and only him do we worship and obey. And the Pope is his counterfeit on the earth. And his Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan, a counterfeit of the body of Christ. That's a Protestant education. That's what they were getting in their homes and in their schools, a Protestant education. What was the textbook? The Bible. The Bible. But listen what Francis Rooney considers important for education. The school offered an extraordinary education for an American, deeper and more cosmopolitan. Okay? It wasn't the Bible. According to Francis Rooney, their education was even deeper and more cosmopolitan than the Bible, which the Protestants were using. Oh, these Jesuit-trained people are, extraordinary education. It's not in the Bible. They're not educated in the Bible. They're educated in Roman Catholic canon law. They're educated in Greek philosophy. They're educated in earthly matters. all the emphasis taken away from the Bible, because the Bible reveals who the Antichrist is. If they read the Bible, well, they'll become Protestants. You see why the Pope, all through history, condemned the translation of the Bible into the languages of the people? And when they did translate those Bibles into the languages of the people, they went about collecting those Bibles and burning them. And when that didn't stop the gospel of Jesus Christ and the proclamation that the Pope was the Antichrist, they went about burning both Bibles and those who read them. You can't have an old world order, much less a new one, if people are reading their Bibles. The Protestants in the colonies were reading their Bibles, but these Jesuits, why, they were educating Catholic boys with anything but the Bible. All right? The school offered an extraordinary education for an American, deeper and more cosmopolitan than any colonial Protestant was likely to receive at the time, albeit one earned by exile from home and family. Here's a quote from Charles Carroll. He wrote back home, he said, "Most of our Marylanders do very well," says Charles Carroll, who wrote back home in 1750, quote, "and are said to be as good as any, if not the best boys in the house." So that little Maryland colony sent a bunch of dedicated Roman Catholic boys across the Atlantic and into Flanders and into the Jesuit school of St. Omer's, and they rose and shone. The best boys in the house, it says. Okay? Given events on the political horizon in the late 18th century, the curriculum at St. Omer's was notable. Now listen, never once is the Bible going to be mentioned. Here's what the education they got. Along with Latin and Greek classics, students were given a steady diet of Catholic theology. That's not the Bible. They were given a steady diet of Catholic theology. Now, what do you suppose Catholic theology is? Catholic theology is the Pope's not the Antichrist. Despite what the Protestants say, the Pope is the vicar of Christ, the very representative of Christ on earth. As a matter of fact, he's God hidden under a veil of flesh. And you must, by conscience, assent to everything the Pope says. And you must not even hold any mental reservation against what the Pope says, because to disobey the Pope, even in thought, is to disobey Christ. Okay? That's Catholic theology. Just one aspect of it. But you can see already what Catholic theology is. I could spend the rest of the day talking about Catholic theology. Most of it would be over your head, judging by the fact that nobody in this country virtually anymore knows who the Antichrist is, so they certainly wouldn't care. They would scoff at the idea that the Pope is the Antichrist or the papacy is the Antichrist. Therefore, they don't even care what the Roman Catholic Church teaches. They don't care about Roman Catholic theology. They don't even care about the Bible. Okay? But along with Latin and Greek classics, students were given a steady diet of Catholic theology as interpreted by the intellectually probing Jesuits. So their entire education was slanted by the intellectually probing Jesuits. This is what we call a Jesuit education. And it's all geared toward fitting that individual, that student, to perpetuate Roman Catholic theology, or rather Jesuit Roman Catholic theology, and to make you fit servants for a global monarchy under the papacy, and to help conquer all potential opposition. Okay, they would have been exposed to Thomas Aquinas' writings from the 13th century. Thomas Aquinas is regarded in the Roman Catholic Church as the quote-unquote angelic doctor, when in fact he is a demon. Thomas Aquinas' writings of the 13th century, but also to the works of 16th century Jesuit thinkers such as Spanish Francisco Suarez and Juan de Mariana, and Italian Jesuit priest Robert Bellarmine, Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. What do all these three people have in common? Francisco Suarez, Juan de Mariana, and Robert Bellarmine? Well, they all had not only their Catholicism in common, not only their Jesuitism in common, but they all were thinkers and philosophers, and their ultimate creation was a form of government called democracy. Now that ought to make the hair stand on the back of your neck. Do you know that the form of government enjoyed today in the United States of America was a Jesuit creation? That's right. Democracy is a Jesuit form of education, a Jesuit form of government, rather, created by Jesuit thinkers such as Francisco Suarez, Juan de Mariana, and Italian Jesuit Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. These authors were, in their way, as rousing as John Locke on the subject of liberty. Jesuit liberty. It cannot be compared to the liberty whereby Christ hath made us free. No, the Jesuits are going to counterfeit liberty now. And they're going to call it democracy. But there's a hitch in their get-along, and I'm going to explain it to you. It says in Summa Theologica, which is the angelic writing of this angelic doctor, Thomas Aquinas, distinguish between just and unjust government, proposing that subjects, that is, you and me, the sheeple, had a right to rise up against an unjust tyrant and even commit tyrannicide, that is, the assassination of an unjust tyrant in certain extraordinary circumstances. All right, what was the history of the Roman Catholic Church before Thomas Aquinas? The historic teaching, the Roman Catholic theology teaches that the Pope rules by divine right. As Vicar of Christ, the replacement of the Son of God on earth, which literally means Antichrist. Just look it up in any dictionary. The prefix anti and vicar are virtually the same word. If you call the Pope what his official title is, if you call him Vicar of Christ, you're literally calling him Antichrist. If you were to stick out your hand to the Pope and shake it and say, "Hi, Mr. Antichrist," he would just simply courteously nod and expect you to kiss his ring. Remember, notice that when Pope John Paul II visited the European Parliament and a good Protestant man was standing in the back calling him Antichrist, Antichrist, Antichrist. John Paul II just nodded and smiled. He acknowledges who he was. Antichrist. That's his title, Vicar of Christ. It's one and the same. No distinction. Textbook dictionary definition of vicar and anti are exactly the same. They don't even try to hide the fact. In the very title of the Pope, he is Antichrist. But according to Roman Catholic theology, historic Roman Catholic theology, Orthodox Roman Catholic theology, the Pope is the Vicar of Christ, the Antichrist, and he must be obeyed as Christ, and he has the divine right to rule this world, both over spiritual and temporal things. Global monarch, King of kings and Lord of lords, that is his divine right. But since it's logistically impossible for the Pope to physically manage the whole world, he has to rely on, well, vicars of the vicar, okay? And that happens to be the kings of every country. The popes picked the kings. The popes instructed the kings on how to rule the people according to Roman Catholic canon law and the decrees of the popes. And they did, or else. The Pope even oftentimes placed their crowns on their heads. And, of course, if you allow the Pope to place your crown upon your head, then you have received your power from the Pope. And if the Pope becomes disenchanted with you, Mr. King, he can remove that crown, right? If he put it on, he can take it off, right? Right? Just like if the Catholics wrote the Constitution of the United States, well, then the Catholics can change it, can't they? Or just do away with it altogether and replace it with another form of government called the New World Order. You see how dangerous it is to go mucking around with the Antichrist of the Bible? He'll subtly insinuate himself even over your own soul. And instead of Christ being your king, who you profess with your mouth, you wind up serving Antichrist with every member of your body. That's the condition we are in today. So, during the old world order, when the Pope ruled over all the kings of the earth and did his bidding and ruled the people as the Pope required, contrary to the scriptures, obviously, and contrary to God's law, and contrary to the worship and service of Jesus Christ, Thomas Aquinas had a perfectly counter teaching. Well, during the old world order, if you killed one of the Pope's kings, you were toast, buddy. Because they served with the same divine right that was given to them by the Pope. You ever hear of the divine writers? You ever wonder where these monarchs of Europe, those who were called blue bloods and divine writers, do you ever wonder where they got their blue blood and divine right? By the only one that ever claimed divine right, the Pope. Okay, they served the Pope. They got divine right to rule from the Pope because he was God on earth. If the people rejected that Pope, then they were placed under interdict. If the people rejected their papal king, they were placed under interdict. All their churches were closed. You couldn't get married. You couldn't baptize your children. You couldn't even have a burial. They closed the churches. Okay, if your baby died outside of being baptized, according to Roman Catholic canon law, they went to limbo, not to heaven. So it was an extreme punishment if the Pope leveled an interdict against the people of your nation. If they rebelled, if the king rebelled against the Pope would just send someone to assassinate him. But nobody else better assassinate that king. He belongs to the Pope. He's under the Pope's jurisdiction and only under the Pope's jurisdiction. So it's the historic Orthodox teaching of the Roman Catholic Church that killing a tyrant or killing a king is, well, a violation of the Pope's divine right. But in a world where democracy is going to rule and reign, and there might possibly, since after the Protestant Reformation and Protestantism spread all over Europe, there might possibly ascend to a national kingship a Protestant. In which case, then, it is quite appropriate for the people to rise up and kill their king. Never before in the history of the Roman Catholic Church was it allowable for a people to rise up against their king, unless the Pope said to throw him off his throne. So we have to have a new policy that is more, shall we say, palatable to Protestants in a majority Protestant world. See, the Jesuits, they have to take on the appearance of their target. in order not to be discovered. The Jesuits had to conform the Roman Catholic Church, at least for a time, to Protestant thinking. Protestants believed that they were the vessels of the Holy Spirit, that God no longer dwells in temples made with hands, and that the only just government was a government that ruled of, by, and for the people. So the Jesuits had to conform to that line of thinking, at least outwardly. Thanks to Thomas Aquinas, that has been done. We've run to the end of our time for today. We'll return and pick up this subject again on the program tomorrow. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Email me at tom@cwaves.us. I'll see you tomorrow.